I did a good audition for it. They decided to go with a newcomer. I mean, I'd only done a few parts, but I did have, Of Mice and Men, and they could see that I was a kind of a serious guy. I produced the movie, I acted in it, and I directed it. So I think that caught their attention a little bit.
Tough business.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's 1,000 people that would want to play in that movie, and they didn't get it. There's only one person that gets it. Crazy.
I was lucky to get it.
Crazy.
Good fortune.
You jump into this next chapter. It's called Darkness and Light is the name of the chapter. A very common theme on this podcast. Part in getting into the chapter a little bit, you say, back in the mid-1970s, a young, incredibly talented theater student joined us at those early meetings held at Illinois State University to discuss the creation of Steppenwolf. As one of the meetings was winding down, she pulled a fifth of scotch out of her purse and announced, "Come on, everyone, let's go." Everybody laughed. We were all into partying. Pot and booze were always available on college campuses, and the fact that this young theater student kept a bottle of whiskey in her purse didn't seem unusual to any of us. That student was Moira. Before I knew her very well, and I drank and partied right along with her and the rest of our friends in those days. Over the years, I've known many wonderful performers who are explosive and funny on stage, but who are shy, fearful, reserved, and even a bit awkward in daily life. Performing gives them the confidence and feeling of self-worth. Sometimes they will add a little alcohol on top of that. And Moira wrestled with self-confidence and fear. Performing and alcohol helped quiet those feelings. One night, and again, I'm jumping through stuff.
I'd kind of jump over some of that, and maybe just this is kind of a difficult chapter, and I tend not to go through it too much. But Cliff's Notes, maybe.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough chapter.
Yeah, it was a hard one to write. This
sure
particular chapter, because it's a very personal and difficult family story for our family. But it's a hopeful story as well, and that's why we wanted to include it.
Yeah, and what I liked about reading it was, look, I hear from people all the time that are caught in this trap. And this is the story of that this trap doesn't have to keep you, that you can get out of it. And that's what you get into, as time went on, going back to the book, I began to see that it was a big deal. As life with Moira's drinking got scarier and scarier. At one point, about 1995 or so, I simply stopped drinking with her. I figured if she didn't have me as her drinking buddy anymore, then that would help and maybe she would stop. But that was wishful thinking. Alcohol was consuming Moira by then. And sometimes she would drink so much she'd pass out. As time went on, I had to be careful what I said and how I said it. Because when she drank, she would react unpredictably and kind of crazy. She started to hide her drinking from me and the family. I'd get rid of booze, all the booze in the house, but I'd find an open cabinet. I'd find a top cabinet with a bottle tucked far away in the back. I'd sometimes find a bottle hidden in the tank of the toilet. At times when I came home, she'd reek of perfume and mouthwash, an effort to hide her drinking from me. And at this point, you had signed on to do a show called George Wallace. Was that a movie?
It was a TNT miniseries. About the governor of Alabama.
And by this time, alcohol had taken control of Moira. It was as if she had two personalities. When she was drinking, she was her beautiful self, respectable, Dr. Jekyll. But when she drank, she turned into an out-of-control and scary Mr. Hyde. Sophie was 9 years old at the worst of Moira's drinking. Mac was 6, Ella was 5. Moira was always a great mom and tried her best, but because of her drinking, at times I felt afraid for our children. Each night, Moira would drink. Then each morning, she'd feel guilty and apologize. I'd tell her she simply couldn't keep doing this, and she'd say, "Yes, you're right, I'll stop." But the next night, she'd do it again. She couldn't help it. So many good things were happening with my acting career. I'd started rehearsing for George Wallace. with John Frankenheimer and was trying to focus on my role, but night after night, when I came home from rehearsals, our home turned into a battlefield. You say here, jumping ahead, finally it became clear that Moira had no ability to stop her drinking. I didn't know where to turn. I started going to Al-Anon family groups for people worried about someone with a drinking problem. I started seeing a psychologist who specialized in alcoholism and helping families through difficult challenges. I learned that family members must become tough in their love. I needed to become ruthless in combating this addiction for the sake of my wife, but it was very hard to do. You want to plead and beg and appeal to the wonderful, loving person you know is deep down inside, but that person has been consumed, swallowed up, and cannot hear you. And you kind of get to your wit's end about this, and you talk to so John Frankenheimer, was he the director
of George Wallace? Yeah.
And you finally open up to him and you tell him what's going on. And back to the book, he'd now been sober for more than 25 years and was a serious attendee of Alcoholics Anonymous. He was a hardcore AA warrior and told me what I needed to do. I needed to take Moira to rehab. I needed to do it right away. So you take her. You take her to rehab. She's freaks out on the way there. You compare her to Linda Blair in The Exorcist in terms of her behavior on the way there. And you're asking yourself, like, who is this person and what's happening? Fast forward a bit here. You say an average stay in rehab is 28 days. My wife stayed in rehab for 7 weeks. She was there the entire time I was shooting the movie. I received a call from the facility at one point, and a rehab supervisor indicated they were having a hard time getting Moira to admit she had a problem. She thought she was fine and that everybody there was messed up. That meant trouble. If you never admit you have a problem, you'll never get better. And you, when they were telling you that she wasn't admitting to it, or she wasn't owning the problem, that you kind of knew this is not good.
Yeah. That was not surprising because I knew she was kind of deep in the throes of the devil had his hands around her neck, and we had to try to come up with some additional ways to get her to admit it and to face it. And she wasn't going to get better if she didn't realize what her issue was and that it was real. So rehab, after 7 weeks, I brought her home, and within probably within 4 months, she had fallen again and had to go to rehab again, and that's when things began to get better and change after the second time.
Yeah, and it seemed like that was a point where, you describe finding out that she's basically you're on the road, you're doing another thing, snake eyes, and you're on the road doing that. You get a call from your daughter basically saying mom's still drinking. You say here in the book, I wanted to be the loving husband, the gentle husband. I wanted to ask Moira nicely, please don't drink again. But with the vicious enemy of alcohol taking over the life of the woman I loved, I learned that you could show no mercy fighting this enemy. I called John Frankenheimer and said, Moira has relapsed. I'm heading back to Los Angeles, but I don't know what I'm going to do. John said, it's time to take the gloves off, and he told me exactly what I needed to do. When I arrived home the next day, Moira opened the door, and I spotted it right away. She'd been drinking again. I came in the house, gave her and the kids a hug, acted as if everything was normal and fine. After a short while, I said to Moira, honey, you look tired. Why don't you go down and take a nap? She said, I am kind of tired. I think I will. She went to lie down in the back bedroom. 20 minutes later, I checked on her. She was out like a light. I packed 3 suitcases, called a car to pick us up, and wrote Moira the hardest letter I've ever had to write. I explained we'd reached a point of decision. She couldn't have our family and still have alcohol. She needed to choose between us, and she needed to get serious about her choice because I was finished. I told her I loved her so much and I wanted her to be okay. What I wanted most in life was for her to be sober and happy and for us to be together again as a family. But we couldn't do that if she continued to drink. I was taking the kids.
And that's that's not an easy thing to do. You always want to, I remember, because I started seeing counselors myself to help me with this issue. I started seeing a counselor who was focused on dealing with alcoholism and problems, and I started going to Al-Anon and doing, where can I turn to get some help here? And, you keep wanting to, the next day after a bender, the night before, you see the sweet person and she's apologizing and, you're hugging and everything, and that you just want that person to stay there, and so you kind of, you go, okay, and you believe them when they say they're going to stop or when they know they misbehaved, But then it happens again, and then it happens again, and the same thing over and over and over. And at a certain point, you do have to get as vicious as the demon is. It's like it really is wrestling a demon. And so I did what we had to do, which is something to shock her into reality that there was no continuing in this cycle anymore for us. And if she and it did it. She's a loving, wonderful person who loves her kids. And fighting for her kids, knowing I had taken them back to Montreal with me and they were going to be with me while I made this movie, and you don't have anything to worry about now. You don't have to take care of the kids. They're not there. I've got them. You focus on yourself and this issue. And within a couple of days, she took herself to Betty Ford Clinic and checked herself in. And that's the last time she, right before she went in there, she had her final drink.
I had a friend who, had a lot of money, was very wealthy, and lost his son to opioid overdose. And, he was kind of talking me through what had happened. And one of the things he said to me, he said, I had unlimited resources. I sent him to every different rehab, all kinds of different, drugs, psychologists, therapists, unlimited resources to try and get his son off of drugs. And he said the only thing I didn't do was tough love, is the term that he used, which is what you did here. Take the gloves off. And I can't imagine how hard that's got to be to hold the line in those situations where, when you're looking at your kid, your wife, you're looking at your kid and you're thinking, okay, I'm not going to give you any more money. Because that's the other thing. Like, not only was this guy sending him to a psychologist, it was also, hey, Dad, can I get $100 to go out to eat? Well, all that money's going to drugs. Hey, Dad, can I go to see a concert? Well, all that money's going to drugs. And, oh, by the way, my credit card's missing. By the way, there's $80 missing from my wallet. So he's enabling this behavior the whole time. And the only way to stop it is, okay, you know what? You're getting nothing from me. That means you can't stay in my house. You can't get food from me. And that's the sort of extreme measures when you're fighting against these extreme demons that it seems. And again, I'm not a professional, obviously, but it seems like when you're going against something that's as powerful as drugs or alcohol, you have to take extreme measures.
You do. There's no question about it. And as I said, John Frankenheimer came into my life at the right